Welcome to the Embracing Brokenness podcast, where our goal is to engage with all of those willing to venture deeper into their transformational journey with Christ. Here are your hosts and the co-founders of Embracing Brokenness Ministries, Steve and Colleen Adams.
Welcome, friends. Thanks for joining us. We're going to do something a little different this time, and that is introduce a segment that was recorded at the beginning of the year, before COVID hit, before the lockdowns, as part of a teaching series that Colleen and I do on a regular basis. This particular segment talks a lot about knowing God, knowing His love, and it's drawn from Genesis 1 and 3. But what we do is show a video clip that BBC recorded called Planet Earth. So it gives our audience an opportunity to just absorb the beauty of what God created even after the fall. And can you imagine what it looked like prior? But then we also start talking more about what God's intent was for each of us. Knowing Him, knowing ourselves better, and how that relates to loving others. So without further ado, I want to jump right in and have Colleen explain what I'm talking about. Blessings to you all.
So guys, we started with Genesis 1 and 2. Our goal being to start to talk about who is God and to understand how we create connection with Him. Whether you believe in God or not, if you try some of the practices of looking for what we call God kisses, looking for the places where God invades your world, hopefully you will see Him invade your world. And more, the more you worship, which, just stand in awe of what He's done, in awe of the creation, go deeper into understanding who His character is, the more you do those things, actually, the more God becomes present with you. So we talked about Genesis 1 and 2. Our belief is that we're made for the garden and God wants to return us there. Yes, after the red Lego, if we accept Jesus, we can get there for the rest of eternity. But we're saying you can actually live in that place for the rest of your days here. And it's a game changer for you of just that. I'll never forget in my Christian life, I was about 36, and I'm like, if this is all there is, I got my ticket to heaven, that's great, but this feels ridiculous because of that grind. Like, we're working our rounds off with all kinds of dysfunction around us. I'm like, it just doesn't feel like this was supposed to be. Get a ticket to heaven, and then just basically try to survive here. And if you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, we are actually called, as image bearers of God, to share His likeness into all the world. Okay. And I think, as I look around, I've talked to staff here about it. Every place Steve and I go, we were just in a little cafe getting coffee. Of course, there's a guy beside us. We start up a conversation. Ends up he's a Christian, but everywhere we go, we end up having these conversations. And what is coming up really clear a lot of ways is the world's getting more chaotic. There are things that are really scary for us to understand, like what is happening in Australia, a fire. Or fires like we have on the West Coast, but horrible fires came through, blew up, a lot of their lands, the koala bears. We don't know if there will be any living off natural lands anymore. They might only be in zoos. We are watching horrible destruction all around us, and you just see it. And so it can be really fearful unless you get that God is in control. And there is a plan for the restoration of all things. Incredible destruction is coming from one side. And part of that we put into place because when we made the choice in Genesis 3 to eat from the fruit that said we know better how to run our own lives than God does, here's where all the consequences were. Okay, I sinned against God. Okay, I sinned against my very identity. I sinned against myself and invited all kinds of crazy crap in. I sinned against my primary relationships, but I also sinned against the ground. I sinned against the earth and all of nature. So everything, one of my favorite scriptures in the Bible talks about everything, all the animals, the trees, the mountains, everything is waiting for the sons of God to take for their rightful place, for everything to be restored because they're subjected to the fall. When I watch Planet Earth, I go, they don't want to be trying to attack everybody and just, their prey animals don't want to be running all the time because they're being preyed upon. I guess the prey animal is the one who's eating things, but, everything is saying, in every fiber of their being, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And I believe there's a rebellion inside of every single one of us too, saying this is not the way it's supposed to be. And we know a different way. There is an echo in our very souls back to the way it's supposed to be. And I think it creates a lot of tension for us. And so we see in Genesis 3 this complete rebellion against God. And honestly, that rebellion, I've often used my body to say, if we're the Trinity, how do I serve you? Will says to Steve, how do I serve you? Steve says to me, how do I serve you? We are constant in service to each other. That's what love looks like. I don't think, what's in it for me? My only thought is, how do I serve you? Will's only thought is, how do I serve you? That's what love looks like. In our brains, love today, when you love someone, very rarely are you not trying to get something out of it. Unless God is pouring through you. So we don't even know what love looks like. And love is probably a thing. It's one of the reasons we want you to understand it as the primary nature of God is love. Is it's so twisted in society today that we love cars. I love my coffee, especially if it's French press made by my husband. And we love things that are not having anything to do with how do I serve you, how do I serve you, okay? And when we said this is not good enough for my existence, I'm going to rebel against it, we did a complete turning away. So we don't even see what love looks like, and we walk out our own journey. I know better how to run my life. I don't have to listen to anyone. But the path back, the transformation path, which takes time, is a turning back to love and learning, because half the time I'm going, I still want my own way, learning how to submit back into this love of this Trinity. How do I serve you? How do I serve you? I promise you guys, remember this, you will not experience love until you learn how to, without any self-centeredness, let the flow of God's love pour through you, that you are actually loving purely. It is a transformational process that goes through your body. It will change you, but it's part of what it looks like to lay yourself down in your own needs, your own desires, and follow what God tells you to do. And when you get into that space, it is the best place of being you will ever find. Loving for the sake of loving because God first loved us, and it's pouring through you. So Genesis 3, really bad things happen that's actually set up the entire Bible. Genesis 3 sets up for us, when God curses the serpent and said, you will strike woman's heel, she will crush your head. We set up what just happened with Jesus being born. Because Jesus is the crusher of the serpent's head. It is the final taking of the keys of death. When Jesus dies on the cross, gives up his life for us, he exchanges his place with God so we can return to the garden with God. So we fully don't have to have a veil or anything between us. We can be in intimacy with God. Jesus, knowing full well that place is the only place where it's going to make that little red Lego worth living, because, we now can live for eternity with God. So it's the great exchange happens. But we see in the Old Testament what our human nature is now, that we can't find our way back to God. Doesn't mean God loves us any less. David is one of my absolute favorite characters in the Bible. And if you know about David, great story. David looks over on a rooftop and sees Bathsheba bathing. And assuming she's in a bathing suit, she could have been naked. I don't know. But he lusts over her. And lust isn't good enough. He calls her to himself. He has sex with her. She gets pregnant. Now he's like, oh my gosh, now everybody's going to know I got her pregnant. She's married to, one of my generals on the battlefield. Let's bring him home so he can lay with her so I don't look bad. Well, then he comes home and says, you know what? My guys are in the battlefield. I am not going to indulge myself and leave them out there. I'm not having sex with my wife. So now she's still pregnant. So what does David do? He sends one of his best friends and his general to the front line. You have to be on the front line. So he gets killed to cover up his sin, okay? We learn a whole lot about ourselves from the Old Testament, because not only did he do all those things, he still loved God and celebrated God and danced in the streets in front of the ark. He is like an amazing man who is living in this sinful state of, I want what I want that I want. And other times he would start turning back to God. Okay, God, your way. And other times he'd go do his own thing. And other times he'd come back to God. And you know what God says about David? He's a man after my own heart. He loves David. So nothing stops the love of God. But we see through the Old Testament what Chris is talking about, this is really, really hard to do. Like, whether it's about work or just how difficult it is difficult because of the condition we find ourselves in. And then Jesus comes, and Jesus tells us about a different way. And he tells us the path, honestly, and shows us, models us what it looks like to turn back and to walk in love and to serve and to love. And the basis of Christianity is not a whole bunch of all this fighting. It is simply a posture of, how do I serve you? How do I serve you? Because in God's image, I am the light of the world. And when I'm doing this all the time, people are going to take notice, because it's so abnormal to not try to serve myself all the time. And the light shines really brightly. And God says, take that forward into all the earth. Why? Because he wants people to know the way back. That's our job. When you focus on that job, the mundane parts of work actually go, yeah, well, I got to do that. But this is really cool what I get to do over here. And it becomes a game changer in your life. Does that make sense?
This was another episode of the Embracing Brokenness podcast. For more information on Embracing Brokenness Ministries, or to subscribe to our blog, podcast, YouTube channel, or engage with us on social media, please visit our website at embracingbrokenness.org. Thanks for joining us.